right, welcome back to another episode of Raise 'Em Up as we continue in this book, The Three Big Questions, coming out of Fuller Youth Institute, and really diving into one of those big questions this time with chapter 4, looking at the big question of identity. And I know we reflected a little bit before we even got it started. Like, I appreciate that it just lets us sit in the question. It doesn't give us the answer or even how to wrestle with it just yet. It just allows us to sit in. And I think the challenge that I'll give to the two of you as we have this conversation is let's keep it on the kids, right?
Yep.
I think it'll be so easy to do what adults often do far too much, which is project ourselves. And it's certainly good to ask ourselves when we were teenagers. But I realized as I was reading through this, at least, that I could apply so much of what it's talking about to me currently, right? As an adult.
Yeah.
And so it's like, let's do our best to keep the conversation. But yeah, first reactions about this. And as you even hear me say those things, what comes to mind for you guys?
It's good to recognize that the sources of identity are going to be different for different people. So like how I view my identity isn't going to be the same way that someone evaluates their identity. So I liked that they highlighted in this chapter 4 kind of places that where students and youth might be saying, I am this. And they're going to be gleaning that information either from other people's expectations, from their own desire of what they want to be, unfortunately, sometimes what they lack, or what they want to be perceived as more than. So in those 4 ways, they may not all resonate with me, but I need to kind of figure out as I listen to these youth, as I listen to these kids, which one of those, are they maybe centering in, or which ones seem to be coming out so that then I can communicate effectively with them. So that was a big takeaway for me.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely unpack each of those 4 things because I think they're like pretty critical to recognize the nuances of each of those 4 ways of answering the simple question of identity, which is, who am I, right?
Right, and not somebody else's view of you. It was the first thing that I highlighted in this chapter was that our identity is our view of ourselves.
Sure.
So this is what is their view of themselves, and not what are their parents' view of them, what are their teachers' view. And I think that affected, as we talk about this, it kind of affected those 4 places. But the big thing is that it's their identity. Not ours, not as a parent, not mine.
Right.
Their identity.
And for some, those are inextricably linked.
Absolutely.
So I believe about myself because this is how someone else sees me. And so that's one of those categories was I am what other people expect.
Yeah, and growing up is hard, trying to figure out who you are in the midst of everything going on around you, and then all the different places that they fit in. Because that was a big part of this is that, kids are our teenagers, they're part of lots of different communities. And so who am I might be different in one community than in another, and how do they reconcile?
And that's why I appreciated the big analogies, at least for me, that came out of this chapter, whereas when we think about, like, again, we're talking to parents, raise them up, or people that walk alongside of young people. So I loved the initial analogy was like you're dealt a deck of identity cards, right? I really appreciate that.
Yeah, like in Clue or something.
Yeah, and it talked about like as us, like we are very, very comfortable with the cards that we know who we are, right? Or we hope, right? And so we don't really want to find new cards.
Yeah, right.
We don't want to be like playing different new cards and have to figure that out. But for our kids, it's like they have the handful and they're trying to discern themselves through all their vast experiences. Okay, what card am I? Or what card is everybody saying I need to be? Or what am I seeing in culture and whatnot and all these other things? And then the second illustration that I really appreciated, which was in one of those 4 unfolding pieces was, and I really appreciate this because I recently, you don't even know this, like after one of our podcast episodes, you told me that you went to a show that you really loved. I actually went down to the Hobby Center for the first time and saw it, right? It was a great show. But the illustration was a student is standing on a stage, and in the audience is everybody that they know. And again, just being in a theater setting, I'm sitting there watching this all play out. I mean, imagine standing on a stage and you got your family over here. You've got all the people that you really follow on social media, front row. You've got the people that you go to church with over there, the people you go to school with.
Your team,
the team,
coaches,
the class, the teachers. Everybody is on this stage and looking at you. And again, like we can all reasonably say, you're giving yourself too much credit.
Right? Not everybody's looking at you.
Not
Yeah.
everybody's looking at you because we're all doing the same
Yeah.
thing, worried about how many people are looking at us. And again, young people, right, are doing that same worry. And I try to encourage students to see that and feel that because they're always measuring themselves
Oh, yeah.
based on everybody else. I said, look, everybody else is in the same boat. But still, that pressure's there. And I appreciate both of those illustrations then in this conversation about what it means then to wrestle with the question of who am I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that stood out to me in this chapter were just some things to keep in mind. Like, are we adding to their identity stress or are we supporting them? Because sometimes I think we try to oversimplify their struggle to find identity by saying, oh, just be yourself, live your best
that
life.
just
You know?
word, yeah.
That's where it started. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
that's where the
unpack,
chapter
I was
started.
yeah,
like,
unpack
oh,
that for us.
ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah, unpack that for us. What does
So-
that just word
So
do?
like, oh, just be yourself. Well, when somebody is struggling with, well, which self am I? I mean, like I have these people who are expecting this of me and this group over here, and I don't feel comfortable with this aspect of myself, and yet this is what so-and-so sees in me or is telling me should come out more in me. That it actually raises the stakes rather than bringing calm. When you say just be yourself, it can actually make the situation feel more pressured for someone who isn't certain what that self is supposed to look like or hasn't felt solidified and confident in what that is supposed to look like. And we often put conditions on it. Just be yourself and get your homework done.
They were
just be yourself.
Well, and that's what I was going to go
and-
to. Yeah, that word just.
Yeah.
Which, like, I know there's going to be some parents that are rolling their eyes, some people in general, right?
Yeah.
But a word, I'm a big fan of words, English major, all this stuff. A word can communicate so much. And when you use that word just, what you're communicating is this should be very simple and easy. And it's not acknowledging the complexity of, especially when it's just be yourself, you're not acknowledging the complexity of the number of cards, the number of choices, all the people in the audience, but then any other task. It seems so easy and so simple because we've gone through that confusing time of our lives. But
We're
the
done
time
with
of
it.
adolescence and growing and figure out who you are and all the different choices, saying things like just do your homework, just clean your room, just do the dishes, whatever it is, saying just is you looking at them saying, dummy, this is simple. Do it.
We're
right?
minimizing
What's
what
the problem?
their
Exactly.
anxiety and stresses in that moment, in that thing, in that time. We're saying, "Ugh, you're making something important that's not." When to
Yes.
them, it really is. We have that conversation at my house a lot with teenagers.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to look and go, my husband and I look at each other and we're like, what?
Yeah.
We don't get this. And then we have to stop and go, wait a minute. You know what? For them in this moment, this really is a big deal. And so then we have to step back and re-enter the conversation or try to re-enter whatever is going on, reminding ourselves that for them in that moment, it really is important. And when we say, it's just not a big deal.
Yes.
You're dismissing.
yes.
And they don't feel like they can talk to you because they don't feel like you get it.
Right.
So one of the other things I wrote down a little later in the chapter was it's kind of like social media in generalities. Like, and I just, as I read it, I was like, ugh, that just disgusts me that there's so much importance on social media. And then I immediately wrote, but it's important. So I need to guard myself and not allow my reaction to dismiss or diminish the importance that they feel. Even though I don't think that the amount of importance is healthy that they're maybe giving to it, okay, fine. But when I start to communicate, this is how I see it, and you should be seeing it this way too, when I'm overly zealous in putting off something that they're focused on or something that's important to them, then I am closing the door on what they need me to see that they care about.
And it circles back to so many different conversations we've had on this podcast, just the importance of listening.
and
Of sitting
taking yourself
there.
out of it.
Yeah, and the ever quotable Ted Lasso, right? Be curious. Not judgmental. That's a listening word. And again, and it might be a surprise. I would imagine it's a surprise for some of these parents to hear using that word just is actually a judgmental word that you use.
our
At least that's where it's
intention-
heard. That's the way it's heard. And again, whether or not it's meant to be, we understand you're not trying to, you're just trying to fix, right? Which is
Right.
that gets back into that in this
Yeah.
chapter at one point. But that's the idea. Is just as again, there's a level of curiosity we have to have, and a level. And I'll go to where the chapter kind of ended, right? Which is identity is not something. Even though we are hopefully at a stage in our lives, adults, where we have a somewhat good grasp of our identity, identity is just not that simple for students. And so we need to make it somewhat, or we need to affirm, not make it. It is. It is what it is. We need to affirm when identity is confusing.
Messy,
for our,
complicated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when they don't know. It's okay to not know. Which, again, I'll start somewhat at the back of the chapter moving forward before we tap into those 4 pieces. That it was really cool at the very end of this chapter, chapter 4 of the 3 big questions for every teenager, change every teenager. There's a section on anxiety, and it was really helpful for me. They did a lot of misunderstandings about anxiety, and what I felt was very important was one of the misunderstandings that it's all because of technology. And what was so interesting as they unpacked that was actually, yes, it's true. Anxiety is higher since 2012 when 50% of people had phones in their pockets, right? And I usually give it 2010, but it was cool they pointed out 2012. But they did point out that like at-risk behaviors that are usually done in groups have significantly dropped.
Right.
Meanwhile, like the individual level has heightened. But it mentioned that the overwhelming, this was cool. I mean, it was good to notice because I first saw this in 2016 when I was at the National Youth Gathering in New Orleans. They had an opportunity for students to text in, and actually it was very appropriate to the conversation. They had a prompt on the screen, and it said, "What is standing between you and your identity in Christ?" So it did have to do with identity. And I was so surprised. Again, this was the month before I came to Trinity. So it was right before I was starting my career as a youth pastor. And I was so surprised that the number one thing that was coming up on the screens was the number one thing that was mentioned here. So here it is, 6 years later, they're still seeing this. And that is the pressure that they felt from parents and adults in their lives.
Yeah, that's what I highlighted in that section. And I think since we've been doing this podcast, it's been great for me as a current parent of teenagers. And I think even if my kids were younger, I wish I'd have learned some of these things, or not maybe learned, but realized about myself that I'm doing. Because it was many of today's parenting styles contribute to teen anxiety. Parents often put pressure on kids to perform, or we swoop in and try to rescue them instead of letting them work out their own challenges. I mean, and I am guilty of both. When I look at it and I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't want my kids to hurt. I don't want my kids to struggle. So I try to help. Well, in helping, I'm actually causing more problems sometimes because my kids aren't learning how to deal with things. And they're also learning that, hey, mom expects me to be perfect. Right? Because mom thinks this is a problem and she's trying to fix it for me. And so then that adds to their anxiety of, oh, I got to be perfect. I've got to do this right. And I'm like, oh, I do that. That's me.
And
I'm that parent.
I hate to say it, but I think I wish there was a clean answer. Do this, not that, and it would all be fixed and everything. And I think that's the unfortunate position that we're in is as parents and teachers and things a lot of times is we think, okay, well, if we remove this, then they're good. Or if we add this, then we're good. But balance really tends to be, and walking the line really tends to be the best way to go. If we are, if we can see technology for what it is, a neutral thing that can be used for great good, great evil, and a whole bunch in the middle, then we can properly assess and help people navigate it. But once we get into one side where we're obsessing over it's my identity and this is, how I perceive it, and the other side, well, it's absolutely evil and we should shut it all out. That's when we're missing the actual learning opportunities for the students, for the kids, and along with that. So we seek this balance, and I think we do. We really we want to make things easier for our kids, but when we don't know how to answer their questions, I think sometimes our tendency is to dismiss their questions by oversimplifying it.
Yeah. And I was going to say, actually, even probably maybe another word I'd offer is respond to their questions. Because at the end of the day, there's going to be questions you don't know how to answer. And I can say this because there's questions I can ask that I don't know how to answer.
Yeah.
Right. And the most honest thing, the best thing I can do for whoever's asking me that question, say, I really don't know, but I'll look into it for you if you'd like me to.
Yeah.
That kind of a thing. But I think you're right, though. There's the temptation to just dismiss it or throw it away.
Yeah.
Or we don't talk about that or something like that. And I think the other layer I'll throw into this whole parenting conversation, and the reason why there's pressures is because of the temptation of what I talked about. Our temptation will be today is to project ourselves, make it about us. So we'll see in our young people ourselves, and so we'll somehow be fighting a fight that's not their fight. It's our fight.
And this chapter does ask you to do some homework. Evaluate on your own where did you struggle in this identity thing, and which questions really influenced, or which perceptions
thinking back
influenced
when
you
were, exactly.
For the purpose of empathy and for the purpose of clearing out your junk so that you can be fully present and listening and engaged with the kid that's in front of you. There's a Brian Regan comedian sketch, and he says, like, sometimes I think we're just too hard on kids. You got a little kid, 5 years old, and he's holding onto a balloon, and he looks around and something, lets go of the balloon. The balloon starts floating away, and he's losing his ever-loving mind. He's, and the parents looking at him like, Brian, it's just a balloon. We'll get you another one. And he says, but I want you to step in and think about it. What if that was your wallet that just started floating up out of your pocket and into the sky? You'd be like, no, I want that one. I don't want another balloon. And he said, I think we just need to give some empathy for kids these days. And I would say, not just the 5-year-old kids who are losing their minds, but our teenagers.
Oh, yeah.
Who, yes, we don't understand why this friend group is having this, this pressure over them, or we don't understand why they can't seem to prioritize such and such thing that we think is a priority. Well, if we would treat them with the same respect that it's big in their world, whether it's big in our world or not, then that's going to put us in a great posture to listen.
Yeah, and I loved, like, speaking of analogies, I'm a big fan of analogies, if you can't tell. But, like, in that same anxiety section, when you have a panicking kid, whether that's a 5-year-old with a balloon or a 7th grader that didn't make a team or something like that, think of them like a swirling glitter globe.
Yes, that was a great analogy.
Wasn't
for
it?
The chapter, yeah.
This is the swirling glitter globe, which means if you're trying to just, like it's as if you shook up the glitter globe and said, just calm down, just stop.
Just focus.
Guess what?
Yeah.
That's either just going to swirl it even more, or like it's not going to stop because there's got to be a slowed down swirling process for it to stop. And so instead, what do we do when our students are panicking, or people, right? I think we can't apply this to people. You just allow them and just affirm, hey, yep, this is tough. And you know what? I believe we're going to be calm at some point, right? You know what I mean?
We're going to get to
calm down. We're going to get to that place
Yeah.
where this is settled and we can talk about it and affirm and things like that.
And it's normal.
Yes.
Well, they're going to
Struggle
flip their
with-
lid,
yeah.
and you got to wait for it to get back down. Because if all this is all, and I'm just using my brain hand, guys.
Yeah.
Because your brain
brain
is all
child
connected.
kinda.
And as soon as that lid flips and those kids have gotten anxious or gotten upset about something, nothing's going to make any sense to them.
Yes.
Until they calm back down and everything is back connected.
And isn't it those
I've had-
situations where parents usually say the worst things or
we
do
do.
the
Oh,
worst
absolutely,
things?
because we're
we
trying-
flip our lid too
Yeah.
in the midst of it.
We want to contain and we want to settle, and we want, because we don't want to handle the tornado that's happening in front of us. It's too intimidating for us.
I'm not comparing anyone's child to a pet, but it's kind of like, it's reminding me of when it came time to train Spartacus in particular. Sully was great, listened to every command you ever gave to him. But there's a layer to which it was, I think, I don't know if I shared this story in the podcast, so forgive me if I have, but it's probably back in season 1 if I did. When I was training Spartacus, after one of the training sessions, like it was group training. So you're talking about 30 dogs in the same room, having to get them to sit down, wait, all this other stuff. And I'm like, how do you expect this to happen? Well, the trainer came up to me afterward and said, I need you to be more intentional with your correction. And I said, what? And she said to me, he knows what you're saying. He's just not doing it, And I was sitting there going, okay, good. So he hears me, straightforward, he hears me. But there's a level I started looking into this and looking into dog training things, and particularly like the getting them into the kennel, right? I can say over and over and over again, kennel, come on, Spartacus, get in the kennel, blah, 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 blah. He's heard me the first time I say the word kennel. He knows exactly what I want. And it takes me just standing there and being patient And he's eventually going to get bored with me not saying anything
Playing the
more
game.
because playing the game.
Yeah.
His glitter's going to slow down
Yep.
and he'll walk into the kennel. I don't have to say something, do something, step in, force it, whatever. I'm just going to make the situation worse.
You don't have to escalate the situation.
Exactly.
Mm,
Because then it becomes that game, or again, with actual human beings, like it becomes just makes it
Works
even
the
more
same.
confusing and all these different things. Absolutely.
So empathy and being present and listening, continuing themes that are happening in this chapter and stuff we
All
need
of
to
the
keep in mind
things.
all the time
Absolutely.
with our kids.
I think the only other piece of the anxiety chapter before we tap the 4 statements of how people answer the question of how young people answer the question of who am I. The other thing that really struck me was the encouragement by one of the psychologists for 25% of your students' time to be free.
Yes. Oh
But
my
not too
That
much.
blew my mind. Yeah, not over the top, but 25%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Give them that time to just.
Can you imagine having 25% of your day be unscheduled?
That blew my mind. And did it blow anybody else's mind seeing that? Well, what was
Yeah.
cool though, and they didn't tap into this, but the whole idea of like, yeah, because you were made and designed to rest,
Mhm.
Yeah.
to stop, to just be, to delight, all of this stuff.
Mhm.
So all of a sudden, there's a psychologist saying the exact same thing. Your kid needs unscheduled time. But why do we fill up our kids' schedules? Because we're trying to I won't say the word push or force. I want to
Influence.
influence their identity,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
We're
and-
trying to do all these different things.
And part of it is we think we should.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? I
We
mean,
think we're doing them a
'Cause I know we're
disservice if we
focusing on
don't.
kids, right? But let's take it back to parents for just a minute because I think parents, we've got to give ourselves some grace too
Mhm.
and some forgiveness that as I'm looking at, I'm like, man, I wish I'd known that 10 years ago. But it's okay.
Yeah.
Because just like I forgive my kids, one day they're going to forgive me. Maybe when they're laying on their therapist's couch telling them all about how I messed them up. But whatever. One day they're going to forgive me. And it's okay for me to acknowledge to them, hey, I should have done this. You know what? Let's do this now.
Yeah.
And what do you need and what's best for you? But I think as parents, we fall into that identity issue
Yes,
too. Of
yes.
as a mom, I'm supposed to have my kids and all these
Mhm.
things,
all these
and
things.
doing all these things.
Otherwise, I'm stifling their potential.
yes,
or
I'm not
whatever.
giving
Yeah.
them everything, every opportunity to do.
I think it's really important also to know that you might have to fight a little bit for their freedom
Yes.
because the internal pressures they might be feeling, the
Yes.
social pressures, the team pressures, the academic, whatever it might be, they might bristle at this
Oh, yes.
depending on who they are, how they're wired, what's going on in their world. So you might have to fight them in order to give them what they need. Like medicine, like sleep, like all the other
But I
things.
think there's a level of fighting for them too sometimes
yes.
because
and they're not going to see it that way though. But you just have to be prepared. You have to know that like, okay, we are going to dedicate this time because I know in the long run you need it and we need it.
But there's a level of what I'm trying to offer here as being a youth pastor for 6 years. I can't tell you how often I was blown away. And again, it's no knock to anybody
Yeah.
that was in this boat. But like whether it was teachers or coaches or band leaders or
Mhm.
counselors of schools who would put, it's not just parents,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
Would
yeah.
put completely unnecessary expectations or time constraints on students' lives. Because again, I think there's a projection that's happening here of needing perfection, of all this other stuff. And there's a level of, like, I go back to my pastor that I grew up with. I remember I grew up, his youngest was a year older than me. And I was so scandalized, y'all, before Good Friday was off in the school system that I grew up in, that he would not send his kids to school on Good Friday. And I was like, can you do that? And again, this is a mentor of mine. He's one of the reasons why I became a pastor. But I was like, can you do that? Can you say that? But it was because for him and his family, that was, recognizing and remembering Jesus' death was very important for them at that time of the year to be able to celebrate the season of Easter and to spend
And
a
rightly so,
spiritual
and yeah.
day, right? And so there's a level to which what he did in that moment was look at the school system and say, bless your heart, you think you're the ultimate authority of my life or the ultimate authority over my kid's life.
Yeah.
And there's a level of the same thing can be said to teachers and coaches and all this other stuff. It can be said to pastors.
Oh, yes.
Right? It
Yeah.
can be said to all
You
of
got to
us.
come to all my events and do all my things.
Yes. Like,
Yeah.
no, my
Maybe
kid,
not.
and that's where like and again, I don't know if administrators will be mad at me for saying this, but like the whole need for a mental health day for a kid, totally understand it.
Mhm.
Don't have to convince me. Now, I do think there's such a thing as way too many mental health days.
Yeah, sure.
But there's a level to which I don't hate that. And I think I was really proud for like our school and stuff like that when we took away perfect attendance. Because it was that pressure of I have to come to school sick, I have to come to school exhausted, all these other things. And there's a level to which, no, you need to learn, you need to make up your homework. Again, I got a family of teachers, so I appreciate that piece. But there's a level of like, no, actually, and I've told this to, as I've coached, I've told this to kids too, like you value tremendously more to me than any win. Right? As much as we all want to win, as much as we all want to go, you're far more important. And kids need to be able to hear that. And I think often there's a push through it, rub some dirt in it, all this other stuff to so many aspects of their lives, trying to pursue the identity. And again, there's a place for that too, I think, of persistence and pushing through and not just making every molehill a mountain.
Sure.
But all that said, it's okay to have boundaries because you're a human being, and so is your kid.
And we have to sometimes set
in junior
those
high
for them,
and
because they can't.
Yeah, they don't know what those boundaries need to be. They can't advocate for themselves because they're not adults yet. That's the point, But there's just so much here to advocate for those kids and to allow that time and to protect and to speak into that.
Absolutely. Well, as we close our time together, let's look at those four ways that these things are answered. And Melanie, you listed them for us at the very beginning. But when kids are asked the question, "Who am I?" There's four ways. I'll list them and then let's go kind of one by one.
Sure.
I am blank, okay, which is I am what other people expect of me. I'm not blank enough, which it was neat to hear how popular that really was among students. Like 75% of high school students would talk about who they are by talking about what they're not. I am my image. That was fascinating.
My brand,
my mask. I am the way I portray myself. That goes back to that theater.
Yep.
Right? I am what I'm acting out. What is the Shakespeare quote? Life is a stage and all the men merely players, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole world's a stage. And
whole world's a stage. There you go. And then you have the fourth one being I'm more than my label. Okay. So which of the four do you want to tackle first? Which one do you want to go? I mean, I
think we go in order.
Okay, let's go in order.
Chapter.
And I think we've talked about number one in fullness.
I think so. Yes.
I am blank. I am what others expect of me. We find ourselves with other people, so it makes sense that your identity is formed by the people around you.
Right. And at school, they feel like they have to be one way. Like I'm the smart kid. I'm the one that pays attention in class, or I'm the class clown.
Right. And at the lunch table, it might be different than, or in my AP class, it's this, and in my levels class, it's this, and in my, elective. So lots of different masks that are being worn.
Absolutely.
Based on the people, the audience that's there, and what is expected of them in those different scenarios, those different situations.
I appreciate the quote of one of the students that was interviewed here, Rebecca. And so she said, I just really, really, really cared about what other people thought about me. And I really wanted to have the right friends and do the right things. Rebecca pointed her finger at a handful of imaginary people and said, I was whatever I wanted to be for you. And for you. And for you, I didn't have any stability. I kept looking for satisfaction, but none of it was working.
Yeah.
And that's that stage, right? Sitting there trying to be whatever you need me to be instead of, again, trying to figure out who I am. And again, that's a normal journey.
Absolutely.
For a student to be on.
And when you think about it from just a logistics standpoint, how do I make this happen? It's kind of like if you are in character, if you're wearing a mask, you've got the costume on, you can only please one audience at a time. And that was a quote that stood out to me. A majority of teenagers try their best to please one audience at a time. So which one was influencing their behavior in that moment? You might find yourself asking that question. Are they being super influenced by their peer group in this moment? Or is it their coach? Or are they dealing with conflict because they're in a classroom and there's their peers and a teacher and they don't know which one they're trying to please? So the layering effect is a big deal there.
And I definitely see that coaching. Like, it's so funny. Or just in general, walking alongside of middle school students, because the kid you have in the classroom is not the kid that goes to 8th grade leadership retreat. The kid that you have in the classroom is not the one that walks out to the football field.
The one in the hallway is not the same as the one in the front row.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so crazy. But it is fun, like, to discover all the pieces so you can start bridging. Because I think the one in the classroom in particular is the real mask. Of like, I'm perfect and being good and all this other stuff. So you're able to be a little playful with it once you discover who it is. And it's pretty great. Number two is that one, I'm not blank enough. And this is how people just define themselves by their mistakes. I'm not skinny enough, pretty enough, smart enough, good enough, talented enough, all these other things, completely bummed out when you make a mistake.
And so many of the kids, that was kind of where they landed. That was
Yes.
how they identified themselves,
Yes.
is by what they were not.
Yep. And I would imagine that this plagues most people. Most
Oh,
adults
yes.
are also somewhere in this category,
Mhm.
or this has had a
Mhm.
major season of their life. But the one that stood out to me that is worth exploring is some of the cultural identity as well.
Absolutely.
I don't fit enough into
Oh,
this
yeah.
culture that I'm supposed to be a part of. So, whether it's a person that has multiple ethnicities,
Mhm.
doesn't fit in either one fully, and so is therefore somewhat estranged from one or the other, or both.
Well, and this will go into the labels category
Yeah.
too, right? Of like even the word Christian is a label, and I think
Yes.
I think even adults can see that. And there's a level of we think we all fit into one category somehow, and it's just not true. There's a diversity. We are worldwide
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
followers of Jesus Christ with all sorts of different ethnic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds and all this other stuff. So I love being in the melting pot here because we do have such diversity. But there's a level to which it's like there's so many different backgrounds worldwide. So
Mhm.
even trying to label us by anything but Jesus Christ is a really
Which is what I'm excited about
False
the
way to look
next
at things.
chapter, because I think that's where we're going to go.
Oh,
Yes.
sure.
Where
Yeah.
should we find our
Yeah.
identity? Maybe not in all these other things, and not what
Absolutely.
we are not
Yeah.
who we hang out with, but whose we are.
Yes, you bet.
I found the third one so fascinating. I'm the mask. You
Ye-
know,
yes,
my
I am
brand,
my
My
image.
my image, the social media reality of things. And again, I grew up in like late elementary school, early middle school with MySpace, you know?
Mhm,
So it's the
mhm.
first time where it really did it. And I think I've talked about like how critical it was to pick the right song for your page.
Oh, you bet.
or
yes.
the quote, or who are my top 8, you know? Who all
I
this
don't even
other
know what
stuff.
that is.
Right? This is all
Yeah, oh,
MySpace, the
it's-
very
yep.
first.
I
like-
wasn't cool enough for MySpace, and I'm older than you, so I don't know.
or even like AIM, right? AOL Instant Messenger
Yes.
was like, what's my name? I need a cool Instant
Cool
Messenger name.
yes.
Right? Because once I do it, it's done. I'm not gonna have multiple ones, you know, that kind of a thing.
And
So
now
the-
now they do.
Oh,
now
yeah.
students have multiple brands.
Oh, sure.
And so that's a
Oh,
whole nother
yeah.
layer too. But
Yeah.
I agree. This one is the one that's fascinating because I think this one is the one that has probably changed the most with the influence of technology and with the pressure from both adults and colleges and parents and teams and everything.
And
to-
peers, yeah.
Yeah, and peers to have a visible brand, an image of yourself that you are intentionally cultivating to get the results that you want. Now, we grew up with that happening face to face. You know, your dad teaches you how to shake hands and how to, like answer the phone and some of those things, or how to write a letter and sound professional. Well, this is happening instantaneously, constantly, and with an audience in the millions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there are actually, like, for high school kids, like seminars on
Yeah.
how to set up your Instagram and your Facebook page to attract the attention of certain colleges and things
So-
like that,
so
especially
the-
for
The stuff that you do at 16
yes.
is so much heavier
Oh.
because everyone's going to
Mhm.
have a record of it forever.
That's terrifying.
So
I'm
that
like,
pressure,
I'm
let's
it's
so
talk
just-
about
glad.
let's talk about
Yeah.
how this plays out in some examples. The example of the chapter was the girl who described herself as funny, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
everything that she posts, everything that she does is funny. Even when she's feeling bad or has a mistake that she makes a joke out of it and sharing a story or something like that because that's her brand. That's who she is. So what if she was actually sad? Everybody would be like, who are you?
Yeah.
Like, are you the same?
Or this was boring. Where's the rest of, what I signed up
Mhm.
for?
Yeah, exactly. But think about it. I mean, I've seen this play out when someone's the smart one, the smart kid that didn't make an A, or
Mhm.
the athlete that didn't get the starting job, or got a
Yeah.
career-ending injury.
Injury.
You know, so like all of this stuff is like, what does it mean then that I don't have that thing anymore? That was my thing. That's my brand, and it completely destroys you if not. Or go to the completely flip side of the girl who
Didn't post.
didn't put anything in her description of herself, didn't post anything because she said, I would rather not have anything so that I don't get pigeonholed, right? By putting
Right.
something down and
Yeah.
things like that. So
Yeah.
there's that kind of constraint. And I appreciate it. Again, another illustration of this section was the bouquet, right? And the way
Mhm.
Gen Z sees identity is whereas it's not just a bouquet of the same flower, it's actually a bouquet of a lot of different flowers that make up who I am, that it doesn't necessarily make sense and there's not the same combination. It's not all roses that are different colors. It's actually different flowers all coming together for who I am, which kind of takes us into
the next one.
Yeah.
I'm more than my label. So I can be these two things that stereotypically wouldn't go together, or, or I don't want to be seen as something that is part of my life that's a perceived weakness.
Yeah.
So like, let's say I have ADHD. I don't want that to be the way people see me. I want them to be able to see more than just that label. Or, so whatever the label is, they typically are feeling as though that limits or diminishes who they are. And so then the push is, I want to not only be seen for that, or I can acknowledge that, or maybe I don't even want that to be part of what people see. Right. So there's varying degrees of how I want to handle that.
And this section resonated with my senior year of high school into college, which was like all the way through high school, right? I was in upper level classes and I was a jock. Like that wasn't allowed. Like jocks are supposed to be stupid. Even my senior year when I had my appendix taken out, I did the drama show. Right? Again, that wasn't allowed. In middle school, I was in band and played sports. That wasn't allowed. You know, the labels were so contradictory. When it came to college, right? That label of you're going to be a pastor, right? That all of a sudden told everybody everything they needed to know about me.
It's frustrating.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, so we see this all kind of play out then. And I appreciated how, again, they talked about specific issues, right? Which we won't flesh out in this episode.
Yeah.
But like you have like, if there's a mental challenge or anything like that, like dyslexia or something like that. Yes, that's a part of who I am. Please don't define me entirely by one label.
Sure.
Or the people that do and I appreciated the qualifier about like sexual orientation and how confusing, because that's used as a label either to give me a label or if people hear you or associate you with that label, that's all you are.
It might be restricting.
Yeah,
or
and how loving is that
to
to limit it to that, especially on such a controversial issue and things like that. So there's a level of letting people be that diverse bouquet of who they are and talk about individual pieces and hear and listen and have empathy and go all the way through. Race, the same thing, physical challenges, whatever it is. I'm not just this. I can see that play out with multiple students I've walked with along the years, like how confusing it was for a middle school kid to be the lone Black child in his grade and to wrestle with, everybody makes fun of my hair. Like, what do I do with that? It's my hair. It's who I am.
Yeah.
But like, and again, to hear that out of especially as a boy, like, so it's weird to like, okay, good. This is being talked about. Let people be who they are. They're not like just down to one label or anything like that.
Yep. And sometimes it maybe isn't something that's perceived as negative. Sometimes it's just an immense pressure.
Yeah.
So like, I'm supposed to be the smart one, like we mentioned earlier.
Yes,
And so it's like, I want to be more than that. Can't I be funny
I'm not
too?
the only, that's
can't
not
I
all
be?
I am.
Yeah. Yep. So there's tons here for us to sit with and again, just to be aware of, to help us to filter interactions with teens so that we can be empathetic and be ready to listen and be ready to identify where these questions are playing out in their lives and then be prepared.
Yeah.
Well, and respect them, right? Just
Yes,
respect the
empathize, respect
complexity.
it,
Yes.
yeah.
Respect the journey. Have fun with it. Be
Don't let
curious,
the-
not judgmental.
Yeah,
right?
don't
All
let
of
the
it.
intimidation of it cause you to shut it down.
Or the persistence needed to walk by it.
Yes,
Right?
yeah.
So this is going to take persistence by all adults walking alongside any young person, a lot of patience to be able to be that kind of curious and let them figure it out and let them live their own lives and
Yep.
things like that. And again, I think this chapter was just about the question. Next chapter is the one that's going to bring us into how important it is to stay tethered to God's description of us, so it frees us to just be ourselves. And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
uses that word
This
just, yeah.
chapter to me was more about me listening. So, like, whenever I apply it to myself and my parenting,
Yep.
me listening to who my children say they are, not who I
Understand them to be,
Yeah.
right?
think they are, who I
Yeah.
want them to be, but just listening to them to understand where they are.
Yep.
And who they say they are at that moment, or who they are at that moment, not just say they are, because that's who they are in that moment. So just me stopping and listening and taking myself out of the equation,
Yep.
because it's so easy for me to put myself in there and, well, this is what works for me. So this is what I
Right.
need you
Sure.
to do.
Yeah.
And I would offer this
So-
one, right? I'll give you another illustration to close
Great.
this out, right? Think of it more like you're trying to discover the starting point rather than being focused on the destination.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
Yep.
Right? Focus on the
Yep.
starting point, and the starting point is where they are, so that then you can start navigating anything going forward, or again, help them to navigate that way going forward.
You bet.
Well, thank you guys so much for being with us today. Thank you for listening, joining the conversation with us here. You can continue the conversation by finding us on Facebook. We're Raise 'em Up Podcast. Or you can email us, raiseemup@trinityklein.org. That's RAISEMUP at Trinity, TRINITYKLEIN. That's Klein.org, right? Spelling. And I did it well. I'm usually a really
impressed.
terrible speller, usually. But once again, thank you so much. Share it if you loved it. Keep reading, get this book.
Yes.
And we will see you next time as we get to talk about what it means to tether ourselves to God and what He has to say about us. Thank you for joining us.